All right, Buff fans, welcome to our sort of Alamo Bowl recap. Matt Smith and I, we haven't had a chance to really talk about the Alamo Bowl, at least on camera. We were obviously both there, but Matt, we wanted to kind of give that game a couple days to breathe a little bit, and maybe us to breathe and get back to town and things like that, and talk about that game. And obviously a disappointing one for the Buffs, but just give me your initial thoughts on what happened out there in San Antonio. Obviously, for those who don't know, 36-14 loss to BYU.
Yeah, probably it wasn't even that close. I mean, honestly, it was bad, Brian. It was another Alamo Bowl massacre. It was really bad. I did not expect that. I stupidly thought that, heading into the game, well, at least they won't get blown out, right? At least the floor is going to be higher for this one, but they got ran over and it's something that I talk about a lot, and so maybe wishful thinking came into the equation where I was hoping we wouldn't have to cover another bowl blowout. But the truth is that in the postseason, in whatever sport, at whatever level, your weaknesses always get exposed. And
Mhm.
Colorado's weaknesses got exposed. As I was on the field watching that game, it felt like Kalani Sitake's entire game plan was basically just taken off of film all of Colorado's weaknesses that they've had all year, and they attacked them all. And I thought out of any opponent that Colorado faced this year, they did the best job of attacking every one of their weaknesses, right? Like I thought they ran the ball effectively. They were creative with what they did. They stretched the boundary offensively. They weren't afraid to take chances. Look, the Buffs don't really get thrown on a ton deep. Okay. And Retzlaff really wasn't afraid to. Now, he made a couple of mistakes doing it, but
Yeah,
I would say that's not where they killed them. It was the ground game. And it wasn't like it wasn't like Kansas where Devin Neal put up 300 yards rushing. It was just death by inches. It was a situation where Colorado's defense played well enough to give them a chance to win the football game, which all year their identity was really kind of revolved around their defense by the end of the season specifically. So they hung in there, but offensively, all their weaknesses that we saw just kind of came back and haunted them. Inability to run the football, no real desire to do it, lack of creativity, some route concepts that just didn't make sense. Shador didn't have a ton of options. He himself was fine. I wouldn't say he was great, but I didn't think he had much of an opportunity to be great because Colorado's offensive line was just awful. I really
yeah.
thought so, if we're just being real here. So, all the stuff, they struggle with the quarterback run, certainly defensively. And so BYU brought in their second quarterback and had some packages for him to rush the football as well. And, in man coverage, they did a great job of running drag routes and dragging their tight ends and all the stuff that has killed Colorado for the most part the last 2 years. I felt like kind of the chickens came home to roost a little bit there, and it showed you that, to use Coach Prime's own words, there are levels to this thing. And while Colorado made significant strides, and it doesn't take away overall from what they did the last 2 years, that was a real disappointment because A, I thought they played below their capabilities, and B, they were exposed and in some areas that they just have not figured out how to clean up yet. And
Yeah.
so when rubber meets the road and you play the best teams, like that stuff doesn't get exposed against Oklahoma State, who had given up, against Utah, who was so injury riddled that it didn't matter. But
Right.
it does manifest itself against really good competition, especially when everything's on the line, and it did in the bowl game.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I thought the defense, I thought they played fairly well. I mean, I didn't think it was a bad defensive performance. Now, you look at 36 points and it looks like it, but, you know, seven of those came on a punt return, which is all on special teams. Others
Yep.
came on short fields. That that was the offense's fault, and they gave us some field goals. But the defense got lucky a couple times. You mentioned the big shots by Retzlaff and BYU's offense. Well, they dropped a couple big ones early that should have been touchdowns, or at least one of them should have been a touchdown for sure. Another one, I think Carter Stoutmeyer was in coverage, and I don't know if the BYU receiver would have kept his feet or not, but it was going to be a deep pass. So the defense got bailed out a little bit on those, but look, they picked off BYU quarterbacks twice, three times, twice Retzlaff and once Bohannon. You got to give him credit for that. There was another interception by Shiloh on the 2 point conversion that doesn't go down as an interception, but and then another one by Shiloh that was wiped out by an
Offsides.
offsides penalty. So really, DBs caught five passes by BYU quarterbacks. So I thought they did a good job, but just offensively, it was not good. And I was telling you about this quote. I talked to Tyler Batty, the BYU defensive end, on Thursday, I think it was, 2 days before the game. Um, and I've thought about this quote, and then also what Shador said, where he was complimenting that BYU defense on Thursday, and he was saying, "Look, they do things right like 98% of the time." And he goes, "You're going to blow some coverages now and then," but he was complimentary, saying they do things right almost all the time. And listen to this quote from Tyler Batty. Now, as he's saying this to me, Matt, I'm thinking to myself, all right, good luck with that. But then listen to this. He goes, "You've just got to suffocate them. That's what it comes down to. Kind of just take the wind out of them, and that comes down to making sure they don't complete passes." And then he says, "I think Shador is completing 75% of his patches, which is close to 74. That's an extremely high completion percentage, so he's doing a great job. It's up to us to, one, get after him and bring him down in the backfield, and two, our DBs, I think, are going to do a great job of making sure he can't complete those long balls. And overall, little by little, wear them down and get them to where we want them." They didn't complete any long balls all day. I mean, Travis had the long touchdown, but it was a short pass that was all Travis, right? They couldn't get anything going long, and it wasn't anywhere near 75%. He was 16 to 23 for 208 yards. They did exactly what Tyler Batty was telling me they want to do. And that's my one mistake in handicapping this game, Matt, is that I watched BYU quite a bit this year, and I knew they were good. I just didn't think that defense was that good. And I underestimated that defense because they were really pretty salty.
Yeah, the way BYU played down the stretch, you wouldn't have expected them to come out the way they did in the bowl
No.
game, in my opinion. They looked like a team who was really kind of teetering on the edge down the stretch. So you have to give them a lot of credit for rallying back together a month later in the bowl game. That definitely surprised me too, because they almost lost to Houston at home at the
Yeah.
end of the year. That was rough. Even though I know that the Big 12 title kind of got taken away from them, before the game or at least by halftime, it still was a situation where it's like they didn't look great. So for them to come out and play the way they did, and you talk about Batty, everything that he said came true, and the reason why is obviously you have the whole year of tape to go through, and they clearly utilized that month better than Colorado did.
Yeah.
It's not a shot at anybody. It's just what it showed in the results. Okay. And the other part of it is if you don't change and find different solutions and find different ways to do things, this has been a theme of what we've talked about for the last 2 years. And I think back to the Nebraska game where we both said, okay, this is your come to Jesus moment. You have to do things differently if you want to get to where you want to go. And they did. And tons of credit has to go to them. They found some workarounds for an offensive line that is better, but certainly not really any good still. I mean, let's just be honest here. They
Yeah.
had some moments, but they certainly weren't, any great shakes. And they found some workarounds. They went to a little more 11 personnel. They actually, Savell Smalls was able to play this year, so they found some different ways to run the football.
Mhm.
But there was very little formational variety, and then they never changed again. And we talked about this with Pat Shermer at the second bye week when I asked him, what did I say? Do you refine or do you evolve? And he said, well, you do both. They didn't. That's the truth. They did at after like the first quarter of the season.
Mhm.
And then the second quarter, they didn't change after that. And they didn't have anything new in the bowl game. And their offensive line is not good enough to sit up there in 10 personnel all day long and throw the football. We've learned that in 2 seasons, but that opens up a bigger conversation about why they continued to play that way and what they're going to do moving forward and where that responsibility lies. Because Shador has a lot of control of the offense. And so I think it's tough from outside if you're not on the headset to really point fingers at maybe where some of this dysfunction is coming from. But the truth is, and I was talking about this with a buddy of ours after the game, that at times it felt like you had a Ferrari of an offense that you were driving like a minivan. It just there was a real lack of creativity, and be it personnel, scheme, I'm not sure exactly. I think it's a gumbo of all this stuff, but it manifested itself in some poor performances down the stretch to the point where you couldn't dig out a Kansas. You
Yeah.
couldn't dig out a BYU. And it wasn't against the lesser teams because their talent was extraordinary in some areas to the point where you could get past that and cover some of it up. But when it came down to you needing to play all three phases, limit mistakes, a clean football game with a running game, they haven't been able to do it.
Hmm.
And that's why I always talk about 2 and 12 cover up for a lot because they do. And even in that game, I thought, well, the way this is going, you better give Travis about 15 touches because
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to move the football. They struggle to utilize the middle of the field. They struggle. They don't even really try to run the football or make a real committed effort to it. And so those are some areas that came back to bite them, and certainly not having their right tackle that hurt them as well. And they didn't have many answers. The problem is you talk about how BYU wanted to limit what they did deep. They sat in that too deep. They had safeties over both sides, and when
Mhm.
defenses do that, you have to be able to run them out of that look. And
Yeah.
Colorado can't and really won't.
Yeah.
So there's consistent themes here that have to be resolved moving forward, but unfortunately, they weren't able to come up with some wrinkles and come up with a better game plan. I felt like part of it was execution, but part of it was definitely the game plan. And credit to BYU, and that was something there. What was it? Defensive assistant Gary Anderson said after the game. I saw on Twitter that they threw 17 different looks at Shador in the first half alone, and only repeated three of them once, which
Yeah.
just goes to show you the level of respect that they have for a college quarterback, and quite frankly, how well they are coached that they can have that many different looks and be able to execute them and limit what is the best quarterback in the country. So you have to tip your cap because they beat Colorado's ass, and I don't really know any other way to put it.
Yeah. And, you see all the narratives. Obviously, people are going to point at Travis and Shador because those are the two big stars. And, there's all the, I'll just say clowns that say Shador's draft stock dropped. Like, no, it didn't.
No,
It's fine. He's still going to be the number one pick.
no, it did not.
If he's not, he's number two. So I just think, I'm glad you mentioned Gary Anderson. That's a veteran, really good coaching staff that had to do a lot of those things to confuse a quarterback that didn't have a very good offensive line.
Yeah.
And so, when you're Shador and you really don't have an offensive line and you're facing really good veteran coaches like that and pretty good players on that other side, it's going to be a hard day for you. And look, tell me any quarterback you want to list as the greatest ever, and I can find you a really bad game they played, right? And I wouldn't even say that was a really bad game by Shador, but
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
you can find subpar performances from every quarterback ever. It happens sometimes, and to me, Matt, that offensive line was the biggest glaring issue the other night, and um, of course, the natural thoughts are, were they too distracted, going to the bowl game? They weren't prepared, things like that. I don't believe any of that stuff. I just think that they were overmatched on the offensive line. And I think if the Buffs had a solid offensive line, that's a different game. When you're 3rd and 2 near midfield and, then it's 4th and 1 and you can't convert, those are things you can convert when you can run the football. And if you know you can get a yard, you're going to run the football there and not, try to throw a pass. And, I think that was that, by the way, that was a huge turning point right there at the start of the game. If we remember, the defense got a 3-and-out from BYU, and then the offense was driving and they're past midfield and they just couldn't convert that, 3rd and 2, 4th and 1. If they convert that and they go down and score, who knows what that game looks like. But those are things that are easier to convert when you can run the football. And so you look at the offensive line, Matt, and in that game, Tyler Brown started at right tackle. He's an awesome kid. He's just not a tackle, in my opinion. He started the season off at right tackle, and by game 2 or 3, they moved him back to guard because he was struggling out there. He's a solid guard. He's not a tackle. So for most of that game and most of the last 2 games, look at their offensive line. It was a walk-on right tackle. You
Yeah.
had a walk-on freshman, true freshman center,
Yeah.
and you had a true freshman left tackle who is very good. Jordan Seaton is really good. I think he's going to be a first-round pick at some point. But that's what you had. And then you had guards that, frankly, they were in and out of the rotation this year too. So it's not like you had all conference guards either. Now I think Justin Mayers and Kareem Harden were playing some solid football towards the back end, but um,
Not enough to solidify either one of those positions. If they were playing good
yeah, I
enough, they
agree with
wouldn't have
you.
been rotated like that.
Yeah, yeah, but I think they were playing better the last month or so. Like they weren't rotating as much. It
They
was
were
kind of
both pretty bad. Well, Kareem didn't play in that game, but Justin was not good against BYU. I will say
Kareem
after
played
watching
against
the tape.
BYU.
Did he?
Yeah, he
I thought
was
I saw him after the game in his sweatshirt. Maybe he did. I'd have to go back and watch.
well.
I just took a quick glance through it.
I think you saw 55 because that was one of the true freshmen.
Ah,
It was in a
maybe
55.
that's what tripped
So
me up. Yeah, okay.
yeah, so Kareem was playing, but
Okay.
the bottom line is, you look at this last offseason and there was a lot made of. They signed 9 transfer offensive linemen,
Yeah.
and they remade this offensive line. Well, look at throughout the season, you had 2 of those 9 that were in the regular rotation. It was Justin Mayers and Philip
Philip
Houston,
Houston, who we
who
didn't expect to play.
who he
Yeah.
didn't expect to play and was not your starting right tackle coming out of fall camp. And Philip Houston got injured with 2 games left, so he wasn't even there. So by the end, out of those 9 transfers, 1 was playing. And so they're they're going to have to find a different way to. I mean, they obviously have to hit the portal and find offensive linemen, but you've got to find a different caliber of offensive linemen because if even with Shador, you struggle with that offensive line against good teams like Nebraska and BYU and Kansas and Kansas State. Imagine what a guy as good as Juju might be and as good as Caden Salter has been, they're not Shador. And so I would argue, I mean, you would agree with me, they're going to be worse at quarterback next year, right?
No, come on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even if they're good at quarterback, they're going to be worse at quarterback. And so if you do not have a better offensive line, next year could be
Oh yeah. Oh,
another,
well, let's
a
just
big
put it this
issue.
way. Let's just put it this way, and we've talked about this before. If that's Juju out there the last 2 years, his career might be over because of the injuries he would have sustained from taking
Yeah.
all those hits.
Yeah.
In fact, it had gotten so bad that by halftime, it was game over already. They were down 20-0. I guess hypothetically, if they went out and scored to start the second half, then maybe there would have been a little bit of life. But
Yeah.
it was so bad, and you could tell, at least I could, by both teams walking in the locker rooms, body language was just terrible. They knew that they
Yeah.
were just going to get their asses kicked again in the second half. And I thought to myself, well, you got to get him out of there because he might get hurt. And he almost did. He almost got
Yeah.
concussed on the first play. And then at the end of the game, he came up pulling and grabbing at it the back of his leg. And it terrified me for a second. So look, it's a problem. It is a huge problem, and it's the hardest one to fix. Good offensive linemen are not readily available. And when they are, typically, at least right now, in this era of the NIL and the portal, that they're going for huge dollars. And
Yeah.
compared to last year, money is dominating the portal. There was a little bit more parity last year, but right now the guys with the biggest pockets are landing all the top talent. And
Yeah.
Colorado has missed that first wave of transfer guys for sure. So while we're talking about that, I think it's not going to be a different caliber of linemen. I think it's just going to be different guys, and you got to throw the book at the wall again to see what works, unfortunately. And now you're without an offensive line coach for at least the time being until you find one. They're lucky that happened, I guess before signing day or after signing day, so that they were able to lock some of those guys down. You didn't want to scare anybody off because they did sign some young guys who they have
Yeah.
high expectations for. And I saw even Cardi Smith put out there the
Yeah.
emoji on Twitter the other day. So
Yeah.
look, it's not great timing for that specifically. And you're right. I think we all understand that priority number one this offseason has to be finding a way to get a little bit better there. And right now, I don't know that they're going to be able to do that. It doesn't mean that I don't have faith that they're going to be able to land other players. I just know they're not working with the same resources. They don't have Shador back there, and that was a big piece in landing Jordan Seaton when you come to block for the best quarterback in the country. So they've
Yeah.
landed some younger guys, but if they have to go the youth route, there's going to be plenty of bumps and bruises there. So I am not going to just, immediately go, they'll be fine. That is the hardest position to overhaul. It is
Mhm.
the hardest position to develop, and it is the hardest position to find real talent. So that is going to be one of our biggest question marks moving forward, especially considering Coach Prime at the end of the year last year told us that priority 1A was running the ball. He also
Yeah.
said stopping the run. They made a big leap, but they tried. They made a serious effort and they
Yeah.
failed in that regard. So that is an area that they're just going to have to clean up. And look, I mean, there's going to be adversity every offseason, and they're dealing with a little bit of it right now for sure.
Yeah. And I was texting with somebody we both know about Phil Loadholt leaving, and he's going to Mississippi State, and I said, so look, I mean it's a loss. I mean this person pointed out to me, look, that's the place you want the continuity the most, and so that's why he's a loss, and I
Yep.
agree with that. And he's sounded like he was a good coach. The offensive lineman liked him, I also said, look, it doesn't matter who's coaching that group if you don't have better players,
Yep.
because Phil Loadholt could be the best offensive line coach in the country, and you weren't going to get that group to play that well because that wasn't a super talented group, and they've got to get better there. And it'll be curious. I'll be curious to see what they do with that offensive line coach position. Coach Prime hired George Hageman this last
Yeah.
offseason as I don't remember what his title is, like something off the field, like development.
Motivational CEO, something
Yeah,
like that.
something like that, something like that.
Yeah.
But he also, with the new rules where there's more of those staff members that can be on the field coaching, he worked with the line a lot,
Yep.
and he was an NFL offensive lineman, and he was an offensive line coach at IMG and somewhere else. I can't remember where, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the move, if that's your offensive line coach. But whoever it is, Matt, they've got to go get more players because that's what happened to me. That was the biggest difference in that bowl game. You can say all the other things as we said, whether they're distracted, all those things, and maybe those came into play. I think if the Buffs had a stronger offensive line, that game looks a lot different.
Yeah, definitely looks a lot different. There's a
And
lot more that
I,
that
I
goes
just
into
want to
that.
add too, Matt, that I was saying this to somebody else the other night, a colleague of ours, that um, for 2 years, Coach Prime has said their running backs are very talented. They got really good running backs, and it's totally different groups the last 2 years. And I said to this person, I said, they might be, but we don't know because they haven't run behind good offensive line. A good offensive line can make, running backs look a lot better. And we just haven't seen it. I think Isaiah Augustov is a solid back. I think Micah Welch can be a solid back. Dallin Hayden, rushed for 500 yards behind Ohio State's offensive line, but he didn't have a great year this year behind Colorado's offensive line. So um, I don't even think running back is the issue more than offensive line. Yeah, I would like to see a better running back come in here. I'd love to see them go get a guy that has rushed for 1,000 yards for an FBS program, something like that. But, and sorry to cut you off, but I just want to
No,
add
you're
that
fine.
because I think that's part of it. That I think you're okay with the running backs you currently have if you have better offensive line.
Yeah, this is something I've said since the offseason. I don't believe they're okay at running back. They're not going to have a great offensive line, so we can say that. And this is the trap that they can't fall into, thinking that they're okay status quo. It's not gonna translate. We've seen 2 years that first of all, I don't believe they're gonna overhaul their offense drastically to the point where it's gonna look unrecognizable next year and all of a sudden it's gonna be all sorts of creative. That's just I don't believe that's gonna be the case.
Yeah.
And so knowing that they don't have the resources to land some of these top linemen and they may have to go younger and they may have to go the same route and just hope it works out better because they don't really have much of another recourse other than hitting the portal and bringing in some guys that probably aren't going to start at their schools. They're not going to go land a bunch of Power 5 starters, Power 4 starters. That's not going to happen. So you have to find running backs who can make some guys miss. And I think that Welch and Augusta, if there's something there, and we don't know what Hood looks like. We thought that maybe there could be some good moments, and obviously his brother is going to be a big part of this team moving forward, and so I've got some expectations for him as well. But you and I have talked about this ad nauseum. They need a dog in the backfield. They have to, and they went after. They're trying to go after that kid from Tulane. Reportedly, I don't have any backstory on it, but today I believe it was on three, and we know that it's on three. But they put out there that Oregon is now tied to them, which is kind of ties back to what I was saying. Oregon wasn't even on that original list when it came out, and now they are because the money that Oregon is handing out and that Ole Miss is handing, they must be throwing serious dollars around. I would love to know what the Ole Miss roster costs, what they've spent in the portal. It's got to be gazillions already because
Right.
it's still unchecked. There's no revenue sharing. This is the last stop at the OK Corral for these schools that can just drop big checks to go pull all these guys out. So while we can disagree on that, and that's fine. And I think Augusta and Welch, there's something there. I just don't think you're ever going to develop a dynamic rushing attack, and they're going to need that. they're going to need that. I think the RPO is going to help. I think Salter will certainly help. I believe he's going to end up being the starter, by the way, just based upon some other stuff and thinking about it and watching more of his tape, which I have over the last week. I think they're going to end up going with the experience there, and Juju will learn for a year. Maybe I end up being wrong. I think it will be an open competition. I just think that he's got the tools right now to beat out Juju. We'll see, and that's at the end of the year. But obviously, we have a lot more to talk about that stuff in the future moving forward. Either way, though, Brian, whether it's offensive line, whether it's running back, whether it's scheme, I think everything needs to be evaluated, and I think they need to find a different way to think about it moving forward because Shador's not going to be there. And
Mhm.
assuming that the way that they've done things, just because they jumped their point average from 28 to 34 this year, which was impressive, we have to understand where that comes from. And when you
Yeah.
remove that from the equation, what does it look like? So we'll see. We'll see. That would be what I have to say is I don't want to make too many early proclamations because for the love, they just played a bowl game. It's not even 2025 yet. So.
Yeah, and look, it is a bowl game. Bowl games are they're interesting animals, right? And they're very different from regular season games. And just sticking with the bowl game, I do want to point out there's a couple guys that even though it was a bad game, I thought there were some guys that showed up and played pretty well. Obviously, Travis was Travis.
Travis is Travis.
He was only able to catch 4 passes, but another 100-yard game, and he had a couple of phenomenal catch and runs that were you know, uh, if anybody watched that game and came away saying, "Oh, how did he win the Heisman?" Like you're not, I don't know what they're thinking
I'm
because
done. I'm done with that conversation in
yes,
general.
but I think he proved himself as the Heisman Trophy winner again. When you have a game like that, and it was fun to see him score again and to play like that one more time. Defensively, I thought Chidozie was really good, actually. I thought he had some really good moments, and there's some actually some good clips out there of him, kind of taking it to BYU center a few times. Now they had some good battles, but I thought Chidozie was pretty solid. Cam Silman Craig, I thought again played a good football game, and people can say whatever they want about Shiloh. I thought Shiloh actually, played a pretty solid game overall. I know you can talk about his dancing and things like that, but I thought,
Hey, just give me, not to interrupt. Give me a sec. The
yeah.
Roomba just started. Before this
Oh,
thing just starts going all around the house. Hold on. Just give
I
me a
can't
second.
hear it. So, well, while we're waiting for Matt, I'll just keep mentioning Shiloh. I thought that he played fairly well, and Matt,
Stupid
I was
Roomba.
I, I was continuing my point on Shiloh, but I actually thought he played pretty well in the back. I know people can say about the dancing things like that, and he had that holding penalty, which was kind of unfortunate because the BYU receiver fell, and I think Shiloh's reaction was kind of almost reach down and grab him, and he got a holding penalty. But um, he was all around the football. He led him in tackles. I thought he played fairly well in that game, and so I thought there were some guys that played well.
Yeah, I thought Cam played really well. I thought he was good. They missed some tackles in that game for sure. Travis was, excellent. And I guess to the degree that you talk about how he proved that he was the Heisman. Again, he didn't need to prove anything,
Right,
but
right,
just another example of even in a bad game, he can still produce. Like even in
yeah,
Colorado's worst games, he can still produce. So for me, I think it was good to see that as well. I didn't think there were too many good performances. DJ McKinney,
right,
I thought he played well. The corners, Colton Hood too. But really, Brian, Bentley, yeah, Shiloh. I don't know. It was a pretty forgettable game. There weren't
yeah,
really that many silver linings. That was a
right,
team that played well below their capabilities. And I think the more that we go, oh well, here was some individual spotlights, lets them off the hook for a performance that was well below their capability. And
yeah,
it goes back to you have to evaluate the season in two different contexts. One being a team that could have won the Big 12 and should have put up a much better fight against BYU. And the other context of, okay, they've had, an unbelievable turnaround. And, really a bad loss doesn't really take away the fact that they're relevant and that, this was kind of house money. We all had them with what you and I had 6 to 7 or you had 7 to 8. It was, they far exceeded expectations based upon what we thought at the beginning of the year. But by the end of the year, they had developed into a team that should have been able to put out a much better performance. So
yeah.
while there were some okay spots, to me, it was a real down moment. Like it was a real man. That was now to their BYU's credit, that's probably the second best team that they've played the last 2 years. Would you agree? Next to Oregon last year,
Yeah, probably. I mean, Oregon State was pretty good last year too.
they were all right. Yeah, I would. Yeah. Okay, so
I'd put that
that
Oregon State,
caliber.
yeah, that caliber. I mean, it's one of the out of the 25 games they've played, that's one of the top
Three,
five at
four.
least,
Yeah,
three, four
yeah, for
teams they've
sure.
played. Yeah.
For sure. That was my point. And so you ran into a really good football team and you were at your worst.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I know they had a, like you said, why that happened. You and I can't answer that. We also don't have an opportunity to speak to anybody really to figure out why,
Yeah.
immediately afterwards isn't great. And we won't be able to speak to anyone until, when
Maybe
spring ball
March.
starts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that'll probably go quietly into the night and they'll be able to kind of sweep over it, which is a shame because I think it would be
Mm.
nice to figure out what's going on. But at the same time, it happened. They're now making a huge transition. There really isn't even anything other to talk about, in my opinion, from the game
Yeah.
other than Ralphie. I mean,
I was just gonna
I
say that. Yeah.
yeah, like what else? What else do you want to say? They played terrible. They
Yeah.
played terrible. They got embarrassed again, and
Yeah.
that's a couple of times late in the year, and unfortunately, they couldn't get it done. So
Yeah.
it is what it is. It's another. I'll never go back to the Alamo Bowl, even if they make it. I'm not going back. I'm just telling you,
I
I'm not going
look,
back there.
I don't I kind of I tweeted this out during the game jokingly. It was in the second half and I think they were down 30-7 or whatever. And I said, I think I know what's going on because they're the Pac-12 representative in this bowl game. I think the Buffs think they need to play like their Pac-12 selves because that's what they
That's
look
what it
like.
looked
But
like. Yeah.
I'll tell you this: I'm not sure Rick George would accept an Alamo Bowl invitation if he got another one next year. Because now, let's put it this way: if they're in position to get to the Alamo Bowl next year,
We'll
that's going
see
to
you
far
guys.
exceed expectation. But
That's true. We'll see you on Thursday when we do the couple of. We're not coming out on Monday.
right, yeah, we'll,
Yeah,
we'll be there the day before the game.
that's
But
right.
yeah, I will say yes. If they're in position to be in the Alamo Bowl next year, that would be impressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I look. I've covered three CU bowl games. All three of them have been the Alamo Bowl. The final score has been 38-8, 55-23, and now 36-14. And frankly, I chatted with some fans who came up to me on the sidelines, some donors, I guess. I don't know why they were on the sidelines, but they must have been donors. But they came up to me before the game and they said, "Well, what do you think of this one?" I said, "I think they got they match up much better than the previous two Alamo Bowls." And
Well, that's true.
I was way off, and I thought they did, but um,
They did. They
yeah,
just didn't play like it. That's
right. You're
kind of
right.
the problem.
You're right. You're right.
It is like that's why when I said after the game, God, I did not think I'd have the same feeling I did 8 years ago in 2016. I didn't cover it in 2020. You did. But in 20, it felt like the same. It was like a special season, really unbelievable group of guys. I'm going to be sad not to be around these guys a lot anymore. And now, well,
Yeah.
it ended the same way.
Yeah.
It's been, I mean, have you ever seen a CU season end in an uplifting fashion? It's been a long time.
It's been a while. I mean, let's see. I've
Yeah.
covered. Well, this is my 10th season as the full-time beat writer.
Yeah.
Three of them ended in Alamo Bowls like this. We had the one that was they were 5-0 and then lost the seven straight. That
Yeah.
was not good. So, and then there's been obviously other ones that they were just terrible. So yeah, there hasn't been a lot of good ones ending up. And real quick, you mentioned Ralphie,
Oh,
and you talk about transfer portal.
it's bad now.
Honestly,
It's
if
gotten bad now.
CU Athletics had to have been, if they weren't embarrassed enough already by this Ralphie, and it's an animal, I know, and you can't make an animal do things, but if they weren't embarrassed enough, having that was a joke,
It was a
and
joke.
if they don't, they need to go find another Ralphie, and if that means that they spend all next year training one, and there's nobody that runs next year, then fine, go get
Fine.
one that wants to run. And that was the one thing about Ralphie five, and this is Ralphie six, but Ralphie five that the handlers would tell me before when I did a story on that Ralphie, and it was like I think it was the 50-year anniversary, and at that time, and they were saying this Ralphie, she loves to run, and they could see like they knew her demeanor so well, right? And they would say that she would get a game face, like she loved to run, and the
Yeah.
problem at the end was that she was too amped up to where the handlers felt unsafe because she was getting too amped up about running, that they felt unsafe. That's why they retired her. This one clearly has zero interest in running,
It's
and
not her thing.
they're sitting there trying to pull her along, and she's like walking, and it's just all right. Move on. It's been what? Is this the third year with her?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like it's not going to happen. So they need to move on from that. And I would honestly, and I don't know if this is blasphemy in Buff Nation, I would rather get rid of the tradition of Ralphie running than see that again.
Well, the tradition is dead. It's only alive in ceremony right now with her, unfortunately. And
Right.
again, she's doing the best she can. And let's give the backstory again for the people who don't know. She was an orphan bison, I believe that's what it was. And
A
she was
lot of them
raised.
are. Yeah, a lot of the ones they try to get are. Yeah.
Sure, but she was raised by cows. She was a little bit smaller in build anyway. She's a little bit more timid in personality, is what it seems like. She
Hmm.
seems like a sweetheart. Okay, she seemed the little saunter around she did was cute, but that's not the tradition.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, it was not worth the hassle and the cost of bringing all those kids, those Ralphie handlers, of what it took to get her there. When I heard that they were going to bring her, I was like, "You're kidding." That was on them. I want to call out CU. Fun idea, but come on, guys, get real. Like, really, I mean, think about how much money they spent alone on Ralphie's team. What it's basically threw it all in the trash. I'd rather put that in the collective.
Yeah.
That's kind of my point. Is to your point, it makes no sense doing it the way you're doing it. And she I don't know if it's a Coach Prime thing. I don't know if it's a, hey, we can't have the team run out behind her because she doesn't run, so it's gonna be a problem. I don't know exactly why she doesn't normally, because let's be real, the tradition is dead anyway. They haven't been since Coach Prime took over. They haven't wanted to run out behind her.
Yeah.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
So if you're not going to do that anymore, it doesn't really make sense to have it, quite honestly, because it almost kills the vibe of the first quarter at Folsom Field because you're expecting Ralphie and it's like, here comes Ralphie, and then you got to wait for her to get all the way back to the truck and
Yeah.
then the team comes out. It's like that's not what this is. Just stop it if that's what you
Well,
want to do. In my opinion, it's never been that way.
yeah.
They always run out right behind her.
I
They always
agree.
give her like
Yes,
a head start and then they come out.
you're right. But I would say that if this was a, if they did the same exact thing, but this was a Ralphie that ran and did a real run, I don't think it would kill the vibe. I think people would still be excited about it because it's a big charging buffalo. I'll disagree
Two
with you on
thumbs
that
down
one.
to that.
I
It's
do.
one of college football's greatest traditions.
No, I agree with you. It'd be
Don't
better if,
monkey with it. You don't sing the
yeah,
fight song. You don't hold any of the other traditions. It's Coach
yeah,
Prime's program. I'm just saying, let's just call it what it is. Like it's 2 years in, we can get some stuff out without being haters. They've gotten rid of a lot of the tradition, and I think everybody's okay with that. That is one of college football's greatest, most iconic traditions. If you're not going to uphold it, don't do it, in my opinion.
yeah,
That's just my opinion. I'm not saying it's yours, but for me, it's like, hey, man, what's to your point? What's even the point? What are we
yeah,
doing here? It's just it's a bad look. Somebody behind me on the field of the Alamo Bowl was like, "Is she sick?" I'm like, no, this just isn't her thing.
right,
And apparently she wouldn't even practice on Wednesday because she got nervous with the blue turf. I
right.
get it. It's not a natural environment. You're not going to find the perfect candidate every time. It's okay to admit that it's not working and to start over, but it needs to be addressed now because
Yeah,
it's a discussion topic. We should never have to talk about Ralphie running.
yeah.
So I think that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's like, all right, fix it or just scrap it because it doesn't make sense the way it is, at least in my opinion.
Well, yeah, no question. I think if they go into 2025 with that same Ralphie,
Yeah.
then
That's how I feel about their offense in
yeah, I
2025
mean,
too.
honestly, I don't know what they would be doing if they went into the 2025 with that Ralphie. And so we probably spent enough time talking about that. One last thing I do want to mention is look, it was the last game, Coach Prime with his sons, and
Yeah.
um, you know, it, I didn't see it obviously at that moment because we are in the press box, but watching ABC caught up with him like right after his walk with the sons, and he was pretty emotional. He's like, I'm sorry. He goes, I got to get it together. I got to coach. Um, you know, I have to give him credit because even after the game and post game, you tell he was emotional, but still able to talk things like that. This last summer, I've been coaching my son's baseball team the last 4 years, and it was the last spring, and that we were going to be able to. I was going to be able to coach him because he's going to high school, and the very last game, I lost it, man. I mean, it was. it was an emotional night for me, and I was a sobbing mess, the last time I'd coach him. So I give him a lot of credit. He had it together pretty well because I would have been an absolute mess knowing that after 10 years or whatever, I think it's been longer than 10 years for him, but after all those years of coaching his sons that he was going to be that was the last game, I wouldn't have been able to do a post-game press conference. So I give him a lot of credit. I mean, but all the stuff we're talking about, the Alamo Bowl is disappointing, all that stuff. What an awesome thing for him, me being a dad and knowing kind of what that feeling is like. What an awesome feeling for him to be able to coach his sons through this whole journey, and people like him or hate him, whatever. Um, I think it's awesome he's been able to coach his sons for this many years and take him through this journey.
Oh, it was great, and here we get back to the other context where we're going to evaluate the last 2 years, right? And it was fantastic, Brian, to be able to raise not just Shadur and Shiloh, obviously, with Bucky and with
Mhm.
Travis in there as well, but to be able to raise young men who are high character individuals. The other thing, the one other note that we didn't talk about Alamo Bowl wise, Shiloh stayed on the field for like 25 minutes signing autographs for fans, which I thought was really cool in full uniform. He didn't have to do that. That BYU was, everybody was out there celebrating. That was not an easy field to be on after the game, but he
Yeah.
wanted to give people a lasting memory, and I really have a lot of respect for that. And we are very, very lucky to have had these series of events transpire at Colorado that brought them here, brought the Sanders family here. They were excellent representatives and have been excellent representatives of the university. They revived the dead program. Sure, maybe they left some on the table, but no one would have ever thought or even thought about looking at the table 2 years ago.
Right.
So the fact that you can even have these conversations that we can talk about, yeah, they did actually underwhelm in the Alamo Bowl. Well, you put the team from 3 years ago in the Alamo Bowl there, it's 100-0. So the
Right.
point is that it has been a fantastic 2 years, and we'll talk about it more in the season recap. Kind of want to save some of my thoughts on that one, but yeah, certainly emotional, and obviously they all upheld it well. And yeah, it couldn't have been easy for Coach Prime whatsoever. He basically alluded to it as much all year long, how he doesn't want to think about it because that's when it starts to go the other way, and he gets emotional like that. And how could you not? How could you not? I'm not a dad. I don't
Yeah.
plan on ever being a dad, but I can sympathize and empathize with what that might be like in that moment, just from a coaching perspective, knowing that you do have that bond and that special relationship, and now that's done. And he plans to continue doing this. We expect him to continue doing this, and it will forever be different because you won't have them there with you. And he's even luckier because there's a lot of sons who wouldn't want to spend that much time around their father, no matter what, no matter who they were. And both Shadur and Shiloh, are fully committed and understood. And even there are plenty of other Hall of Famers kids who play football that wouldn't want to do that because
Yeah.
it's too close. They're able to make it work. Working with family is not easy, especially when it's sports and that physical and that emotional. And there's so much that goes into it. The long nights, the sleepless nights, the early mornings, schlepping. That was the other thing in San Antonio. There must have been a youth volleyball girls tournament happening
Yeah,
because
there
there
was.
were, yeah, and I thought to myself on Sunday before I left, as these, parents were schlepping around these girls at like 7 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning, think to myself, my goodness, Godspeed, more power to you, because I couldn't do that. And so all of that time invested, it must have been very emotional. So I'm sure he's going to take some time to decompress and reflect because now he can because now
Yeah.
he can. And it's probably a good thing to do because you want to be able to be emotionally aware of what you're going through and kind of experience that whole process so you can move on and you can, let things go and you can look forward to the next chapter.
Well, and look, we don't know him, super, super well, but I will say that as the dad
Coach
of
Prime, we don't know him at all.
right, but that's what I
Yeah.
mean. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter who the coach is. We don't know them
Yeah.
that well. We're not in their homes, things like that is my point. But as a dad of kids around that same age, I will say the way that they act around him, the way they respect him, uh, I can judge that and say he's a pretty good father. And you've got to give
Oh,
him a lot of
that
credit
I
for that.
think, yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to him as a father. And he raised some good sons, and what an awesome experience for him to be able to do that. And I'll also say this, he mentioned that post game, he a few times, before the game and after the game, where look, it's not just my sons, it's Travis, and it's Cam Sum, and Craig was sitting next to him, and he got emotional talking about him. He goes, I've known this kid since he was a sophomore in high school, and Herman Smith, and there's a lot of guys that he has really. And I went back and looked at my interview with him from 2 years ago when I went down to Atlanta for the Celebration Bowl, and we chatted about these things. And um, it's way more than just his sons. He loves mentoring young men and helping them get to where they want to get to, and he does a good job with it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what it looks like. That's a topic for another time, but I mean, I'll just say I'm looking forward to seeing what it looks like without his sons. I think it's gonna be really difficult for him, just because when you've coached them for so long, I think it's natural that it's gonna be difficult. Not that he can't do it, but I think it's going to be difficult. For me, I told you I coached my son for 4 years in baseball. I don't know if I could coach another youth baseball team that didn't have my son on it. It would be hard.
Well, yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, but
and I know it's totally different, but I'm just saying it's weird when you've been. I'm imagine it'll be weird when you've had your sons with you and you've been able to lean on your son as the
yeah.
quarterback, and your other son is, sort of a captain in the back end of the defense, to not have that, to where you look out there and say, where's Shador? Where's Shiloh? So I'll be curious to see how he handles that. Look, he can probably handle it better. I know he can handle it better than me. He can probably handle it better than most, and so I'm looking forward to it. But bottom line is, Matt, disappointing Alamo Bowl, but a memorable season, and pretty cool run that he was able to have with his sons.
Oh, amazing run that'll never be duplicated at all in in the form that it took.
Yeah.
In at least with your blood having the best quarterback in the country and being able to manage all those expectations and deal with all the critics and deal with everything that comes with it.
Mhm.
Many, many, many have tried and failed where they succeeded. And so, yes, when it comes down to the father-son dynamic, I think about Mike McIntyre and J Mac.
Mhm.
He wouldn't even address him by son. That was as it was almost too much. It was all, you know what I mean? Like it was almost 14, Jay. He was almost so indirect that it was almost like, okay, you're ignoring the elephant in the room, to the point where it really felt like J Mac was just another player. I think Coach Prime kind of had the sweet spot of it where, yeah, we're not going to ignore the fact that we're father and son here, but everybody else is going to understand the dynamic too. Like, yeah, they've earned it. So if you want to beat them, go beat them.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of the point. And it was an honor to be around for the final 2 years of that chapter of their journey as a fly on the wall. Again, we don't know them. They're very private people. And when I say private people, even the stuff you see on Well Off, as far as like their personal lives, they're very private people.
Right.
They do a really good job of making you think you know them because they show you a lot of the football stuff, but you really don't. Nobody really does, outside of their very, tight inner circle. And so we see what they want to show us. And I would say I haven't really felt that way about college athletes until I found them, but it's because they're so savvy and they're so smart and they have such high goals and they really have something that they're working towards that's tangible, and they have somebody who's done those exact same things that's giving them the blueprint, and it has worked out extremely well. And I've, again, very fortunate, very grateful as a Boulder resident for 25 years that this happened in our city, because it had been a while since we've all been able to, I was traveling back from San Antonio. People from different airlines, not from Denver when I landed in Denver, a bunch of people wearing CU gear where it really wasn't chic to wear
Yeah.
CU gear for a long time. So they have accomplished their overall goal and then some, of making the program relevant, of reestablishing an expectation, which was what this year was about in the first place. So yes, it has been a smashing success, but still, it is there's work to be done, and they know that as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and one last thing I want to say is that once again, Coach Prime proved after that game, he's excellent in press conferences after a loss.
Oh yeah.
And I've told many people throughout the last 2 years, he's the best post-loss head coach that we've dealt with and I've dealt with a lot of them now
Yeah.
because CU has stunk for a better part of the time I've covered them. But he is by far the best post loss. And you think back to the last Alamo Bowl, and the way the two head coaches have handled the last two Alamo Bowls, and I liked Carl Durrell, but and it was a different situation. It was 2020. It was over Zoom, but you know, when he went to sit down for his press conference, he tells the SID, no players are talking after this game. He sits down and he's just salty and just couldn't wait to get out of there and, gets out of there. Coach
Yeah.
Prime sits down there.
Well, if he did that, he'd be blasted. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah,
because of
I
who
know
he
that,
is.
but he still didn't do it,
No.
and I had people tell me when he was hired, like, oh, just wait till he loses. He's gonna be terrible. Like, no, he's fantastic with us. And so I'm just giving him some props that, look, he sat down and he gave all props to BYU, but he took all of our questions and he brought his two leaders to the press conference. And I know that's supposed to be mandatory, and maybe it would have been in 2020 if it was a normal year, but just the way the two different head coaches handled it, Coach Prime handles losses better than any coach we've dealt with, in my opinion. And he's always been gracious with us. He's been termed a media bully, but I don't really think he is. I think he's been really good with us, and so I just want to give him props for that. I think that he's done a great job, and frankly, I admire the athletes like Shadur that I know it's his job as a quarterback in some ways, but that will sit up there and still talk to us and take all the questions after a loss. That's not easy for a 21, 20-year-old kid. So just want to give them props for that.
Certainly has been a pleasure to cover for the last 2 years, and it's definitely sad that this chapter's over because we've become very fond of a lot of these young men and a lot of these people that we've gotten the chance to be around quite a bit here. And, there's going to be a new crop that comes
Mhm.
in, which is exciting as well. And yeah, I would say that all things told, it has been from a media perspective, you've gotten the ability, if you could sit there and ask and stand in the fire, to at least deal with some of that. I would also just say let's also call it what it is. He's not being put through the ringer either. So there's a softer tone to a lot of those press conferences. There just are. Like there's not a lot of
Yeah,
confrontation because he has pretty much made an example that if you come in there with any sort of confrontational questions, which happens everywhere, by the way. It's not just isolated to there, that you're going to be met with one. And there's a lot of people that are just too scared to try and go there. So I don't want to act like I've got my blinders on here. I'm not saying that he hasn't been anything but good, but I would say that he's actually not being, it's not the hardest press conference I've ever heard.
well, sure, but I mean, it's not like the CU media is not like maybe New York, Philadelphia type media.
Well,
There's
yeah,
not a lot
it's a
of coaches that
college
have been
team.
put through the ringer. Um, so, but I still think he's handled it really well. I think he's been great to deal with, and you'd love to have more access and things like that, but that's just not the way it's going to be with him, and that's fine. You learn to deal with it over 2 years, and but he's been great to deal with, and looking forward to year three. We'll see what that looks like, and I'm looking forward to a lot of what this looks like coming up, and we'll talk about it more. But anything else on the Alamo Bowl? And next week, Matt and I are gonna be back. We're gonna kind of recap the whole season. We'll have our kind of our season awards, and who we think were the players of the year in certain areas, things like that. But anything else about the Alamo Bowl before we get out of here?
Great hospitality shown down there once again. They put on a great event. Colorado just hasn't shown up to play in it.
Right.
That's unfortunate. Very, very grateful to have been around this team, and we'll talk about it more next week in our full season recap. Very grateful that Coach Prime chose to come to Colorado and that Rick George trusted him because it has been a grand slam. He's done a fantastic job, and I look forward to getting into the details on that one with you next week.
Yeah, I'd never been to San Antonio before the 2016 Alamo. The only three times I've been there for the Alamo Bowl. It's a
I'm
great
never going
city.
back.
It's a great city. I'm fine never going back again. And you know, I just want a different bowl game next time around. Look, every 4 years it's the Alamo Bowl, and I just want another bowl game that's not 4 years from now. That's
Yeah.
something different. I would honestly, and you'll disagree with this. I'm just saying this to be funny, but I would take Shreveport over San Antonio at this point, just because it's different. I would take really Boca Raton. I would take
Sure.
maybe not the Idaho Potato Bowl, but
Well,
I
they got one more year that they could possibly get into this, and then
yeah,
does
I
it
know.
change or no? Or they could
Well,
potentially then be the Big 12
they could be the Big
representative
12,
for
so
it
they could get into it in
and get
almost every
away
year.
from this
So
stupid bowl game.
right, there's one more year it could potentially be a Big 12 versus Big 12
I hope they
matchup, but
overhaul the way that they do bowls.
yeah,
I do. There shouldn't be contracts. They need to put together games for ratings, especially when they continue to expand the CFP. The non-playoff bowls mean less and less and less and less. College football in general needs an overhaul. It needs strong leadership. It needs a lot of things that I don't think it's going to get. I think it's going to
yeah.
ham-handedly figure out just a new form or function because they don't have the proper leadership in place and money runs the world and everybody wants as much of it as they can possibly get. So I think we just clumsily move forward and see what it ends up looking like in the future.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's probably a whole other topic. But I would agree with it. I would say have a tier, and let the bowls. Hey, if Alamo's the first choice after CFP, then they have their two choice of any other team in the country.
Yep.
They can take whoever, and then it's Pop Tarts or whatever, holiday things like that go down the list. And so, yeah, let's get the best matchups there that you can possibly find, and go from there. So, but yeah, that could be a whole other show, Matt, and
Yeah.
we're gonna have plenty of time to maybe talk about those things between now and spring ball. So, let's get out of here for tonight, and we'll be back next week to talk about our kind of season wrap up and awards.
Sounds good. If anybody's got any, topics, any questions they got, throw them in the comments and, look, we got time. We got
Yeah,
time. So maybe we'll do a few more Q&As down the line too.
awesome, sounds good, Matt. We'll see you next week.
Sounds good, buddy. See ya.